Well, welcome everybody to the Yoga Philosophy Group coming to you from the Yoga Center of Chico. I'm Lauren Carley, and with me is Tom Hess. In this series, we are studying the Bhagavad Gita and how it relates to your life. We use the translation by Eknath Easwaran right here, but you can use any translation you like. Today, we're studying chapter 6, the practice of meditation. I'm honored to introduce our presenter, owner of Yoga Center of Chico, Tom Hess.
Thank you, Lauren. It's great to be here again, proceeding through our study of the Bhagavad Gita. This chapter is called the Yoga of Meditation, or Dhyana Yoga. Now, I want to take a little bit of time to look at this word dhyana and how it relates to this practice of meditation. Because in the Yoga Sutras, they list the 8 limbs of yoga: yamas, niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. So the last 3 limbs of yoga, we'll just talk about limbs 6 and 7, dharana and dhyana. Dharana, as described in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, is this practice of concentration. And this practice of concentration needs to be before the practice of meditation, which is the Yoga Sutras is called dhyana. So dharana is more a contemplation, a concentration, leading to a state of no thinking. The definition of meditation in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is the state of no thoughts. But to get to that state of no thoughts, you have to go through lots of thoughts and focus them and discipline them and really be focused. So this the meditation isn't simply concentration. Meditation is a deeper experience where there's no thoughts in the mind, and that's a whole different ball of wax. So meditation is a deeper state of concentration. There's a couple of themes that we're working with up until this point. One of them is renunciation, and one of them is practice. And these two sort of need to move in conjunction with one another through the spiritual path. And the thing of it is, in this chapter, Krishna, who is again with Arjuna in the middle of a battlefield, talking about these deep philosophical subjects when there are these large armies on either side getting ready for war. So it's quite a dramatic location. We have not changed the location, nor does the location change throughout the Gita. So at this junction, Krishna has been encouraging Arjuna to perform selfless service or karma yoga. And he goes through in the previous chapter about why the common man should be more inclined towards karma yoga or selfless service yoga rather than this deeper meditative state. Well, it's just like concentration and meditation. You have to go through the selfless service part of the karma yoga practice and the renunciation of all of the distractions of the world to get to a point where you can calm the mind in this meditative state. So what Krishna is doing here is he's moving from a practice external to internal. And this mirrors the spiritual journey from the yoga perspective. It's labeled in the koshas. It's mentioned in Light on Life, Mr. Iyengar's great book about Light on Life. And it's this whole idea that people in the spiritual practice start on the surface, start outside of themselves, with themselves, and eventually end up into a keen practice internally. And that's what this whole chapter is about, bringing their practice from the external world to the internal world. Now, this kind of yoga isn't the postural yoga that you see in everyday life nowadays. It's way different than that. Yoga has evolved quite a bit over the centuries. And whatever you think about it, it's the way it's come. But if we want to look at the classical version of yoga, view of yoga, it really has nothing to do with postures, except a little bit later I'll mention it. But so don't think of this as postural yoga. It's not. It's something different. The yogi, and then Krishna goes on to describe the yogi. What is the yogi? Arjuna asks, well, okay, what does this yogi look like? Well, Krishna goes on to explain, the yogi is one who is adept at meditation, is adept at this ability to calm the consciousness so that there's no thoughts. And the whole purpose behind this idea of no thoughts is it makes it more clear to see within if I am not distracted by things outside. And if I can calm my mind, I can look inward. Okay, so this is one of the definitions of a yogi, someone who's adept at meditation. The next definition that Krishna describes as a yogi is someone who is not attached to the outcome of their actions. This refers back to karma yoga, this selfless service. You do what you do in the world, but you don't become attached to it. It's the concept of renunciation. So a yogi is one who can go through their life with an equanimity, a calmness, a meditative bent on life without being attached to the outcome, without being tied in to the result. This unattachment or renunciation leads one to having more energy, more focus to look within. So these are the two definitions that Krishna has described of a yogi up to this point. He also describes yoga as a process of becoming whole on the deepest level. Now, whole on the deepest level, what does that mean? That means that through one's spiritual practice of karma yoga and meditative yoga, dhyana yoga, one leads to a clear view of the self within. This looking within is a layered effect. You start looking at the body, then at the spirit or prana or energy movement, then you look at the mind, then you look at the vijnana maya kosha, this intellectual element of one's life, then you look at your own, what the result of that is, a blissful state of existence. So it's a layered element. And this is all well described in Light on Life by Iyengar. It's also from the Upanishads, one of the ancient texts of yoga, this idea of the layered koshas. With this exploration to a deeper level, the yogi renounces, gets rid of, doesn't pay attention to, isn't affected by the things that they have no control over in life. And let's face it, there's not a whole lot we all have control over in life. So many of those things are beyond our purview. So the less we concern ourselves about them, the more we can look within and see ourselves at a more deeper level. Now, seems to me there's a progressive element to these practices. That one, initially when their yoga practice begins, Krishna tells Arjuna, hey, the best yoga for the beginner is karma yoga, selfless service. Learn how to renounce the things that are unimportant in life. Learn how to turn all of your actions towards God, turn all of your actions over to God, to that higher self within, to Brahman, so that you don't accumulate karma, so that you don't accumulate this baggage that we go through in life. So that's the first beginning of the practice. But then over time, as the yogi renounces and gets better at selfless service and gets better at renunciation, they're set or ready for the state of dhyana yoga, meditation. And that's what this chapter is about. So it seems to me, because frankly, I had to look back in the text. A chapter ago, Krishna was saying, karma is the best yoga. This is what you should do. And then this chapter, he's saying, dhyana yoga, the yoga of meditation, of focus is better. And so I had to look at that a little closely. And I sort of figured out that it's a progression. You start at this karmic level and you move to this intellectual, deeper experience. So that was my take on that. When one climbs this spiritual ladder from karma yoga to jnana yoga and to dhyana yoga, it's like a mountain. When one first begins a journey up a mountain, great will is needed, great tapas, great. You got to really dredge up the discipline to enter into this journey. But over time, one becomes a little used to it. And they've developed their discipline, the self-will, so that when they get on the mats or when they decide to practice, it takes less effort the closer one gets to the summit. So, but to begin with, you have to expect incredible discipline, incredible self-will, and this is what you want to do. You want to build up this willpower so that when one gets to the higher levels of practice, it becomes a little easier, so not so laborious. Krishna then talks about two kinds of willpower. The willpower that supports the small self or ego self or worldly self, and the willpower that leads towards the big self, the Atman within. Remember the first text, the first definitions, I think the first week we were looking at Atman is a representation of the Brahman within ourselves. So we have a choice, as we always do, with this discipline. We can be well disciplined in the path of accumulating goods, accumulating money, being powerful, being flashy. And self-will will get you there. But that's not the direction we want to go. Krishna is telling us that the direction we want to go is towards the self-discipline that creates this spiritual lightness within, that we are continually renouncing the things in life that limit our ability to go through this self-willpower practice, this discipline. And the thing of it is, it's like the more I lose the energetic drains on my body or weights on my soul, the lighter my soul becomes and more inclined to move towards this disciplined state. So discipline, great, you gotta have it, you gotta have a lot of it, but it has to be focused correctly. It can't just be discipline for discipline's sake. Then, when someone gets to this point of recognizing or seeing the self within themselves, the Atman within, as a result of this, they then see the Atman within all beings, everything in the world. This then is this yoga, this unity of the big self within me or the practitioner with the big self that lives within everyone. This then is this state of illumination where you understand yourself and you understand others, you see others, you're compassionate with others, you're empathetic with others because you see them in you and you in them, that commonality. Instead of the differences in the world, yoga leads us to a unity of the world. So this is then when someone sees the true self, when they see the self in others. And this is one of the prizes of yoga, one of the cool things. You're not shadowed, or the world isn't full of illusions for you anymore. You see the reality under the world. This is one of the goals, to see the reality other than the facade that's always around us. Okay. Then Arjuna, as usual, asks Krishna, all right, how do I do it? And then it's simple. The mind has to become single focused. It has to be, you have to practice dharana, concentration, this single pointed attention. Okay. What do you meditate on? What do you focus your mind on? What do you concentrate on? Well, the Gita says you concentrate on Brahman, that entity, that energetic God that lives everywhere within us and with all around. And but sometimes that's a little tough. What does Brahman look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? So, and I'm going to refer back to the sutras here a little bit. You should be able to meditate on something that touches your spirit to a certain degree. We are all spiritual beings. We've all had a spiritual path. Okay, for instance, me. I was born and raised a Southern Baptist, so a very traditional Christian upbringing. So I have a path there. I have a touchstone. So for me, instead of trying to meditate on some ethereal Brahman figure that only is a word on a book for me, I might look towards something a little more closely aligned with my spiritual understanding, something like meditate on Jesus Christ, meditate on the Lord's Prayer, or a Bible verse, or something that resonates with my heart. The thing of it is this: whatever you choose as your concentration tool or focal point, you want it to be of a higher spiritual vibration. You do not want to be meditating on mundane things or things that will bring your spirit down. You definitely want to be meditating on something that touches your soul, that's at a higher evolutionary state than what you are in, or a higher spiritual state which you are in. And that will lead you then to this element of concentration. Okay, then Krishna goes on to tell Arjuna, all right, but let me tell you some of the basics about this. You find a cool, comfortable space, quiet, clean. He throws in this idea of the deer skin, but I think that's just a nod to tradition, that was something. You don't really need to have a deer skin. You just need to be comfortable. You have to sit up straight. Your spine has to be straight. Now, this is where the asana comes in. For me to sit up straight with a tall spine, it requires muscles, a certain limberness in the groins, limberness in the hips, and an uplifted ability of my inner body to lift my spine. So this is where the previous limb of yoga, asana, comes to play. And this is what we see in modern day yoga. They're asana-based practices. So asana has a place in the spiritual practice. It serves to support the physical structure of the body so that they can calm the mind and go within. So that's the setting, and that's the position that one adopts. Then one meditates on whatever subject or object they choose to calm the focus, to focus the mind. Meditation is an internal discipline for this purpose of single-pointed mindfulness and absolute concentration. Then Krishna goes on to describe to Arjuna some of the other attributes of a yoga practitioner or a yogi. Moderation in diet, never eating too much or too little, moderation in sleep, not sleeping too much or too little, the moderate path, the middle path. As those of you who are familiar with Buddhism recognize that Buddha went through this whole thing. He went through severe ascetics. He started off as a prince with all of the luxuries of life. He went on to be an ascetic with nothing in life, and he figured neither one of this is working for him. So he ended up in the middle way, the middle path, if you're familiar with Buddhism at all. So that's the actions of a yogi, moderation in all things. Then Krishna goes on to explain to Arjuna what the state of the mind is in concentration. And he uses the analogy of a candle flame. So a candle flame with no disturbances, no wind, nothing else around it, is steady, focused, and it emits more light than it would be if it was fluctuating and moving all the time. So he uses this example as the state of mind that you should be in the yoga practice, not being influenced by these outside forces or winds of change that might disturb the flame of the mind. Another analogy that I've seen many times is a body of water. When it's still, undisturbed, you can see through it, it reflects the world around it, and it is a reflector rather than an actor. But once the water becomes choppy, you lose all of that vision thing. You can't see within, you can't see without. So again, an analogy of the mind as a goal towards a single flame or a calm body of water. This is a quote from the Bhagavad Gita. The still mind touches Brahman and enjoys bliss. So this is a little carrot out at the end of the stick. When you can still the mind, when you can get a feeling, a quality, an essence of Brahman, that universal consciousness that lives everywhere, you're filled with bliss. Pretty good deal, eh? So there's the carrot at the end of the stick. Iyengar talks about it in The Light on Life with the Anandamaya Kosha, that last layer, that blissful layer, when everything's working well, when you practice a long period of time with uninterrupted focus and proper practice, you get to this state of a blissfulness. Now, I recognize that many of you who do practice yoga out there has had a little bit of a taste of this bliss. It's a sweet feeling. It's fleeting to us novice practitioners. But as one develops their practice, both mentally and physically, this blissfulness is more apparent, it touches you more, and eventually you want to create an experience where you're in that blissful state for a duration of time. It stays with you longer. Then Arjuna says, Krishna, all this is great, but it's too hard to do. I can't do this. My mind is too moving. It's too fluctuating. I can't focus. Krishna again calms Arjuna down and says, hey, it can happen. You just need to practice and renounce. And these are the two words I use at the beginning, practice and renounce. You practice stilling the focus, stilling the consciousness, stilling the fluctuations of the mind, and you renounce all of the things of the world that become less important to you than your spiritual practice. All your possessions, all of the frivolous things of life. It gives you more energy to practice. So these two things, working in conjunction with one another, will lead one to this state of unity. Now, if I were just to practice and not renounce all of the stuff in my life, it would be like me going up this mountain with this huge backpack, and it would be just laborious, and it would be so much harder than if I started getting rid of the stuff off my backpack before I even started going up the hill. And I got rid of it, and then my journey becomes easier because I'm carrying less baggage. Okay. Then Arjuna asks Krishna, all right, Krishna, this sounds like a lifetime worth of work. What happens if I practice, get 3/4 of the way up the mountain of spiritual achievement and I die? Is all of that for naught? Krishna says, don't worry about it, Arjuna. Again, you're not seeing the big picture. The big picture is you're going to have a life after this. You're going to have a life after that. You're going to have a life after that. So any spiritual attributes or spiritual jewels that you learn in this life will be taken to your next life. So if I'm climbing up the spiritual mountain and I die halfway through, when I am reincarnated, I don't have to start at the bottom. I start where I ended up. And of course, it's a huge mountain. So I might go through hundreds of lifetimes to get to this point, but no spiritual pursuit in this life is lost. It all is to your benefit, both in this life, because it gives purpose to your life. It gives meaning to one's life and the next life. And hopefully in the next life, you'll be born into a family that supports this practice of meditation and understanding the self within. So this is the chapter on the yoga of meditation, dhyana yoga. Thank you. Namaste.
Thanks, Tom. I sent out to those on our mailing list, I sent out the practices. But if you're not on the mailing list and you want to get on the mailing list, you can email either Tom at yogi, YOGITOM at Comcast.net, or myself, lbscarly@gmail. But for those that don't have the practices, let me quickly run through them and summarize what they are. I have two, basically. Number one is I went through the Gita and put it all in a pot, chapter 6, all in a pot, boiled it all down and saw what came out. In regards to practicing, which is part of what we're trying to do with these sessions, is to come up with some ideas of how you can bring this on home to the 21st century. I really like what at the very end of chapter 5, verse 27. I'm not going to cite all the chapters and verses, but this one in particular says, as it leads into chapter 6, closing their eyes, steadying their breath, focusing in their attention on the center of spiritual consciousness. The wise master their senses, which is pratyahara, their mind, ahamkara, and intellect, the buddhi, through meditation. So that actually was at the end of chapter 5. And then when you do get into chapter 6, a lot of what Tom talked about here, but let me boil it down into a few words. Practice. What do you do? What do you do to practice meditation? How do you do it? The Gita says, free yourself from expectations, attachment to results of the work, and enjoyment of the senses, which is pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses. Use your willpower to reshape yourself. Practice one-pointedness. How many times did Tom say this? Fix the mind on me, Brahman. Behold the self by the means of the self. This is all straight out of chapter 6. It can get buried in there. With the consciousness united through meditation, through constant effort with determination and sustained enthusiasm. Here's another way to say that same carrot Tom mentioned. The supreme reality stands revealed in the consciousness. So those are all straight out of chapter 6, but it's boiled down to you. The second practice I might suggest is, so I picked this up because a lot of people have mentioned that when they're in shavasana or pranayama, or they're trying to meditate, all these outside world thoughts come in their mind, and they like to put them in little bubbles and float them away. That's a great technique. It's visual. My suggestion is, before you let that bubble float away, ask yourself, why am I thinking this external thought? And do I want to think that? Or is it just a distraction from what I should be thinking about? Examine it for a moment, then put it in the bubble. Maybe take 2 or 3 breaths. You can kind of time it, then put it in the bubble and let it float away. Be a little more conscious about getting rid of those thoughts. Take a look at them and see, because chances are all of the external thoughts you're doing when you're trying to meditate, you're trying to hold that single focus, are distractions. It's kind of like the garbage of your life, distracting you from your true path. So it's a simpler, easy technique you can try. And there's thousands of other techniques out there to help with meditation. Tom, back to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Well, that's chapter 6. We look forward to doing the rest of the practices along the rest of the Bhagavad Gita in the 4th Thursday of every month with everybody. Keep in contact with us through email or come by the Yoga Center of Chico. We've got all the information listed on a flyer. Okay, so thank you. See you in practice. Bye-bye.